Hi, Richard. This is
Hey,
Coralie
Coralie.
from the Orlando Museum of Art. I'm here with Richard Munster today, and we're going to do a virtual studio visit. So, welcome, Richard. So good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Coralie. I'm
You're
glad
welcome.
to be with you.
You're welcome. We're glad to be with you too. So, Richard, just to give a little bit of background, you and I have known each other probably for about 6 years now. Um, and in March, you were taking part in an open house studio tour. And I was very much looking forward to that with much anticipation. You know, I wanted to come see your studio. But because of the social distancing measures, the whole stay at home program and all of that, this didn't get to happen. So your practice and your work has been on my mind ever since. And on Easter Eve, you happened to share an image on your social media that was just a cup being fired in your kiln. And that image was so full of hope and expectancy and just a beautiful, strong image that kind of prompted me to want to chat with you and kind of talk about your practice and share it with more people. So here we go. Here we are. And I would love to start by maybe asking you to describe your practice, asking you to describe who you are as an artist. You know, I don't want to label you. So kind of it's open to you to kind of give us a little bit of background about who you are and what your practice is.
Well, I appreciate that. That said, like, I don't really mind the labels so much. They're convenient, right? They exist for a reason. So, yeah, I mean, I work in clay primarily. So we could say ceramic artist, but I mean, I really cut my teeth. I learned my practice, my craft, my trade, making pottery, making like functional things that you use in your house, bowls, plates, cups, etc. And at some point in time, I became, enamored enough with the process to kind of move more in the direction of the material, right? The firing, things are changing. It was really exciting at an early point in my making. And I've matured enough in my work now to where like that's a really vital and central part of why I make and to some degree what I make still, regardless of whether this is work in sculpture or like the cup you had mentioned moments ago.
Tell us a little bit about your process and how you move from one piece to the next.
Like one informs the other.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm going through and making pottery work, for instance, these cups, when I make cups, I don't make one cup or 5 cups. I make 30, 40. And within that, I have several different styles or small things about the process that I'm learning or exercising. And to be able to repeat, it's almost like learning a brushstroke or learning how to write. I'm watching my children learn, how to understand math concepts, how to write letters, to watch your letter forms develop is kind of like my analogy for understanding, my material and my process in regards to pottery making. And then when I go back into a place in my mind, in my studio where I'm making sculpture work, a lot of those ideas come from making vessels and understanding what kind of cuts to make, how that clay acts differently when it's wet or dry or whatever it may be. Like those really inform a lot of the sculpture work. Sculpture involves a lot more time to some degree. It's a slower process. So I don't want to say that at that point the marks and the form are more important, but they carry a little bit more weight.
Can you tell us a little bit about your space? You have a home studio, I believe, and one of the amazing things that I can see in the background of your image right now is your kiln. And I know it's been a process in the past couple of years, right? The actual building of your kiln. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's a reality that I was like in denial of the fact that I was going to make a reality because it's a pretty substantial undertaking,
Right.
and I told myself and enough other people, I'm going to do this. Yeah. And eventually it happened. It took a lot of research and work, but there are no other kilns like this in the Central Florida area. And my only other option was to leave town constantly and drive elsewhere and pay money to fire other people's kilns or have them fire my work. So I had to make the choice to build it. I can back up a little bit and get
Yeah,
myself out of the frame. I'd rather not be here. I don't know if we can see anything from here.
it's amazing.
There you
Yes,
go.
we can see you
Can
very
you
well.
see?
Uh-huh.
Right. Um,
So it's an
I'll leave
incredible
it for a
tool,
second.
right? So I'm always thinking about the tools that artists need to do their work. Do you feel you have all the tools right now?
I do. You know, it's funny is the primary tools I'm missing are concrete floors and air conditioning. That's
Ah,
all I want.
I understand, especially in Florida. You know, this tool is pretty incredible, and just thinking about, you know, how all the firing you do within it, and the incredible power and the heat that you have to kind of learn how to harness. Really, it's pretty inconceivable. You know, when seeing those images of your kiln being fired up, you know, at full blast, you know, it's pretty much like bursting at the seams with light and, you know, heat. It's just pretty incredible. And can you describe that feeling of what it's like to kind of learn to control that tool? You know, you're working with an incredible tool, which is fire.
One of the most enchanting things about firing a kiln, especially when you have, I don't want to say the control, but when it's in my own arena, right? And it's in my own space, it's at my home. It is so quiet. It's fired with wood, and the wood is contained inside of, it's a contained fire. It's not an open fire. And you said it does radiate light, but it doesn't make a lot of noise. You have to listen very carefully, and you learn to hear really distinct sounds in regards to fire building, fire, you know, pulling itself back. I can tell how the wood is burning
Uh-huh.
based on the quietest sounds, right? So in the middle of the night, right? And I fire this for usually about 40 to 50 hours, on average 48. I
Yeah.
call it 2 days of like constant firing. Um, I really have learned to love the very late night and early morning shifts.
Uh-huh.
Um,
How often do you need to keep checking on the fire?
I mean, you can't leave it alone or it goes out. So generally speaking, and I fired this 6 times now. This last firing was 6 firings over just about 2 years. I'd have to look at a calendar.
Uh-huh.
Um, I usually fire with a group of about 5 to 6 other people.
Okay.
I fire some of their work as well, and we work in shifts of 2 to 4 people so that everybody can sleep a little bit and not exhaust yourself.
Uh-huh.
This last firing was primarily myself and my wife firing. It was her first full shift, which
Yeah.
was awesome. She did very well. And I had one set of friends come for an overnight shift, despite for distance firing, yeah, so that I could go to sleep for 4 hours, 5 hours, and then come finish firing again.
Okay. Wow. It's
So
a
we don't leave it alone. It's somebody is here all the time.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the results and that kind of feeling of anticipation when you're opening the door? What are you going to find in there? Are you sometimes disappointed? Is it often, you know, treasures? Like, I really feel that I know that it's only part of the work, you know, when you've done that firing and, of course, all the preparatory work to actually prepare the pieces. But after the firing is done, there's still a ton of work to be done because you're left with pretty much like what I would call diamonds in the rough.
I mean, I think, you know, first I'll come with like the artist answer, which is like pretty classic. You know, you go through phases of infatuation. This is going to be so good. And then like, what have I done? Oh my gosh. And if you're lucky, you make it full circle back to like, yes, that's it. Nailed it. I can't process right away what has happened.
Sure.
I know like, wow, this is outstanding. What on earth happened over here? But that doesn't necessarily mean those things are good or bad. There are some things that I intuitively react to as like, oh my gosh, yes, this is why I do this.
Sure.
And there are others that I have to step back and like, you know, revisit over the course of cleaning them, over the course of documenting work and preparing work for market to sell. Sometimes I come across pieces that I would have immediately looked over unloading
Okay.
because they're not outstanding right away, and realize that there's some subtle beauty that comes unexpectedly. I've been making some small and medium-sized sculptural work, but since building the kiln, I've been making a lot of pots. I'm kind of like revisiting my roots, which has been really healthy. It's not my job to decide, it's to some degree, whether something is beautiful or not, because, you know, I can say I don't like it, but pottery to me has always been like a tool for service.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not decoration. It's decorative, right? But like it lives in your cabinet, you touch it, you drink from it. And at some point, it's not my job to dictate whether somebody else enjoys those things or not. So I have to remove myself a little bit from some of those things in order to like let their light speak elsewhere.
Mhm.
I might think something is awful. And I've had, in fact, I tend to sell a lot of work, no offense to anybody, that I think is like, ooh, like, ew, never again. And it just makes somebody else light up,
Mhm.
which, you know, I could go back through all the years and be like, that's one of the things that has consistently drawn me back to the functional work is the special kind of second life it gets to live when it leaves like my hands and my house.
Sure, yeah. I can see the appeal. I mean, a lot of what you do has texture, beautiful texture, and especially when they just come out, when you're loading the kiln, those pieces are rough and just beautiful. It's like they come straight from the earth almost. There's that earthy quality, like the mug you just drank out of. It's very beautiful, and I think today a lot of people are craving that. Exactly. A lot of people are craving that, that the real, the authentic, the genuine kind of materials. And I think there's a lot of that in your work. In your latest firing, there was a large piece with, I think, glass in the middle. And that's part of your practice as well. You've been kind of mixing, the clay, the glass element. Um, would you tell us a little bit about that aspect of your practice as well?
Yeah, I would. I grew reluctant to continue the glass within these pieces, and you're familiar with them for a while because, like, to me, it became a little bit passe. Like, this is an easy thing to make people excited because it is pretty and it's immediately eye-catching. But this is the first time I've re-included that, especially in larger work that I actually really like, in a long time. And to some degree, the challenge to me was, can I take that attribute, that material attribute, and make it elevate the work rather than an experiment, right? In fact, I'll walk over to it. We'll go find it. I just
Oh,
finished
wow.
cleaning
If you want
most
to.
of these today. Um, but, that said, you mentioned like earthiness in the materials earlier, and like pottery is clay. It comes from the ground, right? So it is earth based. I live in a suburban area where we don't have a lot of access to. I can't go to the river and dig clay, right? I can't. I don't necessarily have access to a natural source of those things. But I worked in construction for a number of years, and you can find shower doors or old shelves or car window on the side of the road readily, and a lot of that material has potential in firings. It's a ceramic or glass-based material. So that's really where a lot of the roots, like I use recycled granite countertops in most of my sculpture work,
Uh-huh.
which we can talk about. And if you scroll through my Instagram feed and read through the comments, there's a handful in there talking about it. But this one, I had somebody tell me recently it looked like the elephant's foot at Chernobyl. So I had to go Google what that was. But
It looks like water. It looks like water, captured in that, it's just very beautiful.
to some degree, one of my like fascinations with clay as a material is its ability to so be itself, but at the same time to like mimic other materials. I don't want to say be an imposter, but I have had people walk into gallery shows and say, what is this made out of? Is it wood? Is it concrete? Like, how is that? That's not pottery. Like, that's not ceramic. What is that?
I just have a couple more questions. The current situation is not easy. I don't know how you've been coping.
In regards to my current practice, it's provided me time to really just reinforce moving forward. I've been incredibly grateful to have a place to continue to work during the last month where I would feel very differently, right? I feel so bad for all you guys out there that are locked out of studios, for students, for
Yeah.
people that are missing DFA and MFA seminars and shows.
My
I
gosh.
missed my open house, right, due to the situation, an exhibition in Castleberry, an exhibition that's coming up, which you may be able to catch some of at City Arts Factory through downtown. The Pompeii exhibit, right, has been on the fritz. So I definitely missed a couple of exhibition opportunities, but I kind of live in like a studio forward position at this point. So as long as I'm continuing to make work, the exhibitions tend to come as an afterthought currently. So I'm just happy to be making. And I think I'm going to continue doing that to the best of my ability.
And it looks like you're in the perfect place to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, you'd mentioned missing the open house at the beginning of our COVID situation, and that really was like the first weekend that everybody began to, in any kind of critical mass, look at like the idea of social distancing had started to bubble up earlier in that week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, if you're really paying attention. So it was a bit of a downer, but at the same time, I'm going to rehold that at some point in time. And on top of that, I think I'm going to do it the way that I would have done it initially, right? Which is to invite other friends that make great work, number of other potters in town, and do like a weekend. We'll do a weekend resale, at some point in the hopefully not too distant future. To be able to come and like see the work in context of where it's made, I think is like just a totally different experience than in a like a gallery setting of any sort. Neither one is better, but it's engaging, it's fun. We were talking earlier about work that passes under the radar when you're unloading. I'm going to turn the camera around. I have a whole table full of work that I'm not sad about, but that I was a little bit like, it was lackluster at first, and it's been in my yard for about a week now, waiting to be cleaned, and I'm slowly falling in love with these quiet pieces. I'm excited about them. Can we see these?
Yes, beautiful.
Right, so they're fairly simple forms and cups. They're relatively minimal. The surface is not loud. I find a great deal of like pleasure in looking to make work that doesn't need to scream at you, but still has the same tactile, qualities. We've got a handful of these. Can we see these bowls at any kind of angle here? They're kind of dusty on their surface, but
you mentioned one of your Instagram, you had an Instagram comment from a lady who said she wasn't sure what she was looking at. Can you show us the piece that she was referring to?
Can we see this? There we go.
Yes.
Right. It's a cup.
Yes.
That being said, I could see somebody who is not at all familiar.
It looks like it's chiseled out of stone. So, that's probably why she wasn't sure what it was.
And it was also like a group of images, right? All of just the faces of these pieces. This one is beautiful. I love it. It's quiet, but it's lovely. And she's right. They're not coffee cups that you would see anywhere else. So, sometimes you get stuck in your own bubble as a maker. And of course, everyone realizes institutions a lot as well, right? We forget that like the outside doesn't know what you're doing. So it was a lovely reminder of that. This is a slightly more recognizable object as a cup. It has a handle, but this is our cleaning station. It's a total mess. I'm just going to pan over it for you.
Beautiful.
These are waiting to be cleaned.
Okay.
There's a pile of rubble. These are all like diamond. Can you see this?
Yes.
These are diamond sanding tools, so they knock back all of that hard material at the bottom. But I'll spend the next 3 weeks probably in between schooling the kids and doing all the stuff and food, cleaning the bottoms of all these before I can really put any of them out for sale.
Sure. Are the kids your studio assistants? Do they help cleaning the pieces a little bit? Not yet.
They like to play studio assistant, but playing and being are different things.
Yes, absolutely.
They help in their own special ways.
Thank you.
They do help split and stack wood, right? Where are we at?
Oh, that's good.
This is still waiting. We're still waiting for this. There we go. But I built this. Can we see that?
Yes.
Wood storage shed after our second firing, when I decided I cannot stand having tarps in the backyard. I need proper storage for fuel.
That looks great.
This is my number one tool right here. Is my good friend. Where's she at? I'll pose with her.
Yeah.
This is a log splitter. It puts in its time. And we go through, if anybody knows what a cord of wood is, generally about 2 cords of wood. Yeah. That would be a total of 8 foot by 8 foot by 16 foot stack of wood to fire this kiln every time. All of which comes from like a handful of local tree guys. So I'm sourcing wood that they're cutting down from properties anyway, which is both free and to some degree the mineral content within that wood, right? And we didn't talk much about the process of firing, which is fine, but the type of wood I fire with, how wet it is, where it came from, what was in the dirt, that the tree soaked up has a lot to do with the final result of the work that's coming out of these firings. So,
well, I have one final question, Richard. What's the best advice you've ever received that you'd be willing to pass on to someone else?
I think anybody that's been making work for long enough will tell you, like, just don't stop.
Yeah, that's a great
When you're stuck, the answer is in more work. Work through it.
Yeah.
And that's been like a fallback for me for years and years. So the answer is in the work.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. We really appreciate your time and showing us around.
Thank you so much, Coralie.
Absolutely.